Welcome to the Village Well podcast, brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Welcome back to the Village Well podcast. I'm Jennifer Casper, your host, and this morning I am joined for this introduction by Colin Hinckley, who is a bookseller here, an author, a horror author, and the interviewer in the interview we're going to play today. And how are you doing, Colin?
I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah, had a good weekend, busy weekend.
Busy. We all had a busy weekend.
Yes. Yeah, between LA Times Festival of Books.
Independent Bookstore Day
Yes.
in the store. Have you been able to get some rest since the weekend?
Well, I went to Beyonce on Monday.
Ooh.
So I got home around 2 a.m.
Oh my God.
So I'm still recovering a little bit, but
2 a.m.
Still riding the high. So
Yeah.
it was beautiful. The crowd was amazing. Just everybody, great energy, just really hopeful energy.
Yeah. We need that.
We do need that,
We need
definitely.
that. Yeah. And there's something about getting it from a group gathering,
Yeah.
like a big group gathering, that's special. And that's what we had
for
at
sure.
the LA Times Festival this weekend. The estimates are that we had over 160,000 people visiting. I don't know how many booths there were, but a lot. And we were selling books in 3 locations, so it was really intense work for us this weekend, but such great business. It's just, that festival is such a great thing for the book industry locally. Just we get revenue that we can't collect on a weekly basis that helps us.
Definitely. And it's cool to like books now. So it's,
I love that. Books are trending.
Yeah, I went by the tent a couple times just to say hi, and it was packed every time. So, people love books. People love the shop. It's good news for us.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert.
Same.
So working day in and day out in the shop is sometimes challenging for me to just have all the social interactions I have to, but there's something about being at the festival where you get enough dopamine and adrenaline to, maybe that's the same thing, but just to keep you going. I was jazzed to be talking to people for 2 days straight.
For sure. There's no time to stop and think, and you just got to go through it. And
it's just so positive. Everybody's having fun at the festival and saying, oh, they love Village Well, or they've never heard of it and they want to check it out. So
yeah, good vibes all around.
It feels so good, yeah. And then we also had one of our biggest days of the year, Independent Bookstore Day, was during festival. It doesn't usually overlap, but this year it did, and we had to figure out a way to have a huge day in the shop while having half our staff downtown.
Yeah. It was crazy for the weeks leading up to it. We the back office was just, stacks of boxes taller than us. It's like a maze back there, but we got through it. I think we were all in the mindset of just got to get through these 2 weeks, and then we can.
It's a good thing. And then we'll celebrate.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to reward ourselves. And then last night, there was one other really great gathering. We probably had 60 or 75 people in the shop for this author event. There were 2 authors, Alec Karat-Katsanis and Bianca Tylik. And the books they wrote are respectively Propaganda, about the propaganda that the whole police industry feeds us that makes us fund police, and defund every other kind of service that would make people not need to be chased by police. And then Bianca Tylik, her book is called The Prison Industry, How It Works and Who Profits. And she just talks about the whole prison industrial complex and all the companies that profit, including one that's close to my heart, 3M. The maker of Post-its sells all the equipment to all the prisons in the country that make license plates. And so prison labor is making license plates, and our beloved Post-its are made by the company that profits so much from that. That was really sad to hear.
Ugh.
Yeah.
God.
But it was wonderful to have all the shop full of people interested in talking about those issues. Mm-hmm. And I announced to the group that I really want to start a monthly activist group that's like one of our book groups, and maybe it'll be around reading, but maybe not every time. Maybe sometimes we'll just bring in guest speakers to talk about different issues. And I said it to the crowd. I said, if you're interested, hit me up on email or after. And a bunch of people came up to me afterwards, said they were interested. And I'll say it to the podcast audience too. If you're interested and help us shape or lead such a group, please let us know.
That's a great idea. Yeah. I think there's a big need for that right now, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we sold so many activist books in 2021 when we first opened, when we were in the midst of Trump and the last year of Trump and COVID. And then when Biden got elected, all those books kind of died down and people kind of relaxed for a while. And now it's back and it needs to be back. And we really need to give people a place to gather and
For sure.
and develop those ideas. Oh, and the third person, those two authors were both from the East Coast, but the interviewer is a guy named Richie Reseda, who's a formerly incarcerated person who podcasts and makes films and is local. His I think his real name isn't Reseda, but it's the neighborhood he grew up in. So he goes by Richie
wondering.
Reseda. And he just was really bright and energetic. And I'm hoping to like show some of his films in the shop and have them in
Nice.
for some work, either with this activist group or something else.
I'm all for more film screenings here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
If we have it's a neat little cozy space to show films.
Definitely.
So cool. Well, so I'm excited to get to the interview. You interviewed Philip Fracassi.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of very few live podcast recordings that we've done. So you did it. We had him in the shop for a launch event for his new book. And we recorded it, and it was such a delightful interview to listen to. What was how did it feel from your perspective?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, Philip's been awesome. He did the first event that I ever went to at Village Well, actually,
cool.
where he interviewed Brian McCauley, who's another local author. And after that interview, I talked to Philip, and he gave me some advice about publishing my own book. So we've been in contact since then.
Yeah.
So it was really good to like sit down and talk with him, like author to author, about his process and his work. I was really struck by how workmanlike he is. You know, he's like just very much a working writer, and it's his, job to be a writer. So,
And he's prolific.
He's very prolific.
It
yeah.
pays off.
Yeah, he's written a lot. He has a movie coming out with A24 based on one of his short stories, which is very exciting.
That is so cool.
Yeah. And so, talking to him and just hearing about his process and how unpretentious he is about it, and just very much he's just a hard worker. And I really respect that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes as writers and artists, we can kind of get lost in our own sort of processes and thinking about art. And it was nice just to hear a guy just say, I just sit down, I do the work, and no frills about it. Yeah.
It was a really fun listen. The book is about time travel, and he goes into the science that he learned / created for the book. And
the science in the book is like very convincing. It feels very plausible. It's the first time travel book I've read where I'm like, oh, I could kind of see how that would work. I don't fully understand the science, but and maybe he doesn't anymore, but during the writing of the book, he clearly
talked to scientists about quantum physicists and about how it could work.
Yeah, he did his research, definitely, and it shows.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, enjoy the episode.
Yeah, enjoy. Hi, everybody. My name is Colin Hinckley. I'm a bookseller here and the author of The Black Lord. And today we're going to be talking to Philip Fracassi. So Philip is the author of 6 novels, 3 short story collections, and several screenplays, including, I discovered, Santa Paws 2, The Santa Pups. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Awesome.
For Disney Entertainment.
That's amazing. I would love to see that one.
That is a deep dive. What do they call it? A deep cut.
Yeah. It was on your Wikipedia page. That's how I found out.
Yeah. I didn't know I had a Wikipedia page.
You do have a Wikipedia page. You've also published your debut story collection, Behold the Void, to critical acclaim, including a Bram Stoker Award nomination. You've written such books as Boys in the Valley, Child Alone with Strangers, and your work has appeared in Nightmare Magazine, Best Horror of the Year. And Philip, welcome to Village Well.
Hey, thanks, guys. So my new book is Third Rule of Time Travel, which we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. And Colin did a great job introducing me. I just appreciate everyone coming out who came out. It's nice. It's hard to get around at 6 o'clock on a Friday or a Wednesday when I'm here in
Look out
Culver City, but I'm glad you guys made it. It's nice.
Nice.
Should I read?
Yeah, you want to do a quick reading of the first chapter?
So, Third Rule of Time Travel is my first science fiction book. Normally I write horror, but I had an idea for a method of time travel that I didn't think had been explored. And the idea with the Third Rule of Time Travel is that the time machine, all it travels is your consciousness. So the consciousness is digitized and it's sent back to a point in your lifetime for 90 seconds. And you get to relive 90 seconds of your life. And There are 3 rules in the third rule of time travel. The first rule is you can only travel to a point in your lifetime. The second rule is you can only travel for 90 seconds. And the third rule is that you can only observe. So you can't step on a butterfly and, you wipe out half the human race. You can't kill your grandfather. In theory, you can only observe through your own eyes at a point in your life. So that's the time machine that I created for this book. And I think what I'll do is I will read, and I'm going to do a narrator voice. I'm also going to do a computer voice. So my computer voice will sound different, so please notice the difference. I'm in an airplane, a small propeller plane. I look to my left and see my sister, Mary, seated next to me. A large headset covers her ears, but I make out her profile easily, her mouth, her cheekbones, her eyes. Chestnut brown hair falls to her shoulders. She wears jeans and a black down jacket. My vision turns toward the front of the plane. I have no choice but to follow. A windshield filled with blue sky. A man seated to the left. I can only see the back of his head, but I know it's my father. Seated on the right is my mother. Between them, the plane's console is a smattering of buttons, levers, and lights. Even through my noise-dampening headset, I can hear the whine of the propellers. The sound is like a swarm of hornets. I continue looking forward. My feet, flat against the metal floor of the narrow cabin, vibrate unpleasantly. As a young girl, I'd flown in this little plane dozens of times, Dad's Cessna. The last time any of us flew in the Cessna, I was 12 years old. My sister, Mary, was 15. No, it can't be. I feel a concussion to my right, as if someone punched a hole in the sky, and my vision jumps toward the sound. Out the window, a thick stream of black smoke flows past. I lean forward and glance far below, where an earthen carpet of dense, endless forest rolls past. The plane shakes with a sudden violence. It dips and sways, battered by currents of air. My father's voice erupts in the headset. "Hold on!" The windshield tilts sickeningly, and Mary's hand clutches my arm. My head turns toward her, and I see my own terror reflected in her wide eyes. And oh God, no, please, no, no. Why have you brought me here? Rule number 1. Travel can only occur at destination points during the previous lifetime of the traveler. These destination points are random. The plane shakes with such violence that I'm forced to clench my jaw to keep my teeth from rattling. My vision is vibrating, turning everything around me into a blur of trembling colors. I can barely understand what I'm seeing. Everything is distorted. Focus is impossible. I turn to look at Mary, and then the plane drops. The engine shrieks like a demon, and my stomach leaps into my throat. My hips and chest strain painfully against the locked seat harness, fighting gravity. I watch in shock and wonder as Mary's hair rises into the air, naked fear on her bloodless face. My dad is screaming into the headset, but all I can make out amid the savage fury engulfing our plane are the words, "Hold on," and "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Mom is yelling into a hand mic attached to the plane's radio. I don't know what she's saying. I can't hear her, but I assume it's a distress call. Her lips form the words, "Mayday, Mayday." I think I'm screaming, but can't be sure. It's too chaotic. There's too much stimulation. The windshield is no longer blue. It's green. We're plummeting. We're going to crash. Again. Rule number 2. The traveler has only enough energy to maintain contact with the arrival world for approximately 90 seconds. The ground rushes toward us as smoke and fire billow past the plane's windows. A piece of the engine snaps free, slams against the door next to me. The window splinters, and if I wasn't already screaming, I'm screaming now. My sister claws at my arm. Her fingers and nails dig painfully into my flesh, but I don't bother turning toward her. My eyes are fixed ahead. Even in the maelstrom of the plane's descent, I can make out individual trees growing closer as my dad yanks helplessly on the controls, desperate to somehow slow our downward plunge. We hit the top of the first tree just as my mom whips her head around, twisting back for one final look at her children. In that split second, her face wears a mask of unimaginable sorrow I'll never forget. Then the windshield implodes, and thick branches rip into their bodies, shredding them like tissue, and I'm sprayed with a burst of glass and blood. The plane lurches sideways as it's torn apart. Something sharp and hard smacks into my face, shatters my arm. I no longer feel Mary's grip. It's vanished. The cabin rolls as we slash and tear through endless branches. I'm turned upside down as dark earth flies toward us through the ragged hole that was, only seconds ago, a cockpit. My parents. My legs drop upward and I'm suddenly hovering in midair like an astronaut in 0G, and then we crash into the ground like the blow of a hammer. Rule number 3. The traveler has no ability to interact with the world they have traveled to. What's left of the plane settles to a stop. I'm hanging. My arms and legs dangle, lifeless. My vision blurs everything a swampy gray. I turn to my left to find my sister. I see nothing but torn metal and ruptured dirt. Her empty headset. I try to twist my head to look behind me to find her, but the harness strap is cutting into my neck and my chest blossoms with a pain so deep it steals my breath. In the end, I suffered broken ribs, a broken arm, a concussion, internal bleeding. I steel myself against the pain, force my head to turn toward what remains of the rear cabin. Splattered against metal walls, I see broad sprays of dark blood and parts of my sister's body. I'm not sure which parts they are. I vomit into the dirt a few feet below, my body limp, suspended in the wretched belly of the shattered Cessna like a broken marionette. When this happened the first time, I remember what I was thinking. I'm in a tomb. I'm alive, somehow alive. I'm alone. The traveler can only observe. Yeah.
Yeah. Man. God, I forgot how intense that opening is. That's a hell of a way to start a book, man. So congratulations on the book being published.
Thank you.
It's awesome. It's a really rewarding, really fun book to read. Sort of bounces around a bunch of different genres. So I wanted to ask about time travel specifically. So Stephen King said about writing 11/22/63, writing about time travel is like trying to hold water in your hands. You think you've got it, and then it slips through your fingers. While I was reading, I found that I didn't really have much trouble keeping track of the timelines and stuff, but how was writing about time travel for you?
Yeah, well, I think the time travel aspect, unlike 11/22/63, because of the way the time travel works in my book, you can only visit yourself.
Right.
You can only do it for a small amount of time, and you can't really change anything. So there's a lot less of that juggling that one would do, I think, when writing a more traditional time travel book. Most of the plot twists in my book happen in the present.
Yeah.
Whereas because they were affected by things that happened while Beth was traveling. Beth being my main character and the scientist who created the time machine. So yeah, it wasn't what. But that said, when I turned the book in for edits, to the publisher, Orbit was like, now, because the book takes place in 2044,
Mm-hmm.
and really the biggest problem for me was that they were like, well, on March 25th, 2024, it would actually be a Sunday, not a Wednesday. And I was like, nobody cares. And they were like, yeah, but you got to fix it. And I was like, okay, I'll fix it. And then I was like, oh, but wait, I need this other thing that happened in the book to be a Sunday.
Right.
It matters because she can't be at work.
Right.
So I had to change the dates. So I was like, okay, I'll change the dates. But then I was like, but now this doesn't work because the date's wrong. So that really screwed me up. So it was less, but it was a little, because spoiler free, there are elements of what happened in the past that happened on certain days. She travels to dates that are pivotal in her life. So when that date happens in the present, as it were,
Right.
It's got to be that same day.
Right.
And same date. But so that screwed me up a lot. But it didn't really, I didn't have to worry about a lot of juggling as far as like the past is concerned, because it was pretty limited to her lifetime.
Yeah, that's that's so funny that's the thing you had to get hung up on is. I'm so surprised they were so.
It really screwed up the whole book.
That's so wild.
I had to completely rewrite like half the book because they were like, "This should be a Sunday," and I was like,
Man,
guys are killing me.
Who's even looking at that? That's
and then there were others. The other thing I will say about it is there were parts where, so sometimes when you get an editor note, they're like, "Hey, just so you know, like this model car wasn't available in that year, or this wasn't real, or this didn't exist," and stuff like that. Sometimes but because I was writing about things that were subtly changing in the present, they were like, "Hey, this is wrong because earlier in the book it was this," and I'm like,
well,
time travel, bitch. You gotta like, come on. So there's a little bit of that going on too. So they were confused and I was confused because I wrote the book like in 2020. So they were like, "Why is this thing here?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I wrote this book like 3 years ago." So it was a lot of that, but it all ended up working out okay.
Yeah, that's a fun sort of get out of jail free card.
Right.
It's not a mistake. It's on purpose.
Man.
It's time travel.
I actually mentioned in the afterword, I think I actually say something like, "If there's a mistake, don't worry."
You did mention
it's
that.
because time travel.
So you touched on this briefly, but the mechanism for time travel in the book, which, as you said, is very basically sort of sending the process of sending your consciousness forward or backward. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. That's really
it's confusing.
Yeah. Time travel. That's a really original idea for time travel. I don't think anybody else has done that. So, what was the process of coming up with that mechanism?
Yeah. So, I'm kind of a nerd, and there's this thing called the double slit experiment, and the double slit experiment, you can Google it. It's about how it's a bit of pseudoscience, but the idea is that when these scientists were shooting particles at like protons at these two slits, they created a pattern that was one way, we'll put it, and then. But when they were watching the particles shoot toward the two slits, the particles acted different, and it was more, and they reacted to the fact that they were observed. Nothing else in the experiment changed. So this is a very famous experiment. You can look it up, and it really happened. So some scientists, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, are like, "Oh, everyone thinks like there's this whole like God universe comp thing about it. There's hard science that can explain why it happens and all this stuff." And then some physicists are kind of like, "Yeah, we don't know why it does that." So, but the idea that I stuck with me was the idea that you could change something by observing it. And then I was kind of like, well, what if what you're observing you wanted to change, like really badly, and you couldn't?
Yeah, that
would suck because you were there again and you were in that moment. It's like if you think about your life, and if I could go back and change one thing, I could, and then you have to relive that moment where you could have made that change, but you can't. So I thought that was kind of a really interesting idea, and so that's why that's how it originally sparked in my mind. It's funny because one of the authors who blurred the book was Owen King, and who's on the front cover, and he was like, "Man, I really enjoyed this book, and it's really I'm not really a big science guy, and but it was really really digestible for me to read it, and but I would love to hear more like about how you came up with it and everything." And I was like, anyway, so the point being, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of hoping that nobody asked me about the science because it's kind of like when you take a class in college,
sure,
and then like 3 years later, somebody's like asking you questions from what you learned in that class, like very specific questions, and you're like, I don't know, dude, that was like 3 years ago. That's kind of like it is writing this book. Like I did all this research and I did all this stuff, and now I'm kind of like a lot of it sort of slipped away because I've written like 4 books since then, and so I've got other stories in my head. So I'm kind of like, I'm just hoping that like we keep the science to a minute. You can ask whatever you want.
I got some questions.
But generally speaking, I try to, I was like, man, I'm so afraid that people are going to ask me some tough questions. And I actually did do a podcast with the guy, and the theme of he's like it was a sci-fi podcast. And he was getting into the nitty gritty of the science. And I did okay. I held up okay.
Yeah.
But I remembered enough to not sound like a total idiot.
Yeah, it seems totally coherent. I mean, there was a lot of really interesting concepts in there. You actually mentioned in your afterwards that you were inspired by Michio Kaku, who's a physicist, the author of the God particle. Kip Thorne as well, who's a theoretical physicist who worked on Chris Nolan's Interstellar.
Yeah.
So you did do a bunch of research.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I did. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was exhaustive. I learned a lot. I read a lot of.
Yeah.
And it's not just the time machine either. There's elements in the story that are based in physics and future physics and theoretical physics. Such there's a part of the story, for example, where it's a key element to the story where every time Beth travels, she pre-records 6 questions.
Oh yeah, I love that thing.
And it's the same 6 questions, and she answers them the same way. And then after she travels, they do a debrief, and she has to answer the same 6 questions. And then they play back the questions from before she traveled. And the reason that the recording wouldn't change is because they beamed the questions via at light speed to a satellite far enough away so that it beams there and beams back at the speed of light, and it hasn't caught up to like reality on Earth yet. So the questions that she gives before she travels are actually valid for like 48 hours before they tumble into the new reality. So things like that, I wanted to make sure made sense, much more so than the way I just explained it. And so I had to so I did a lot of research on that, and how far away would the satellite have to be, at what speed would it have to travel, and I was very lucky to have a NASA physicist named Les Johnson read the book for me, and he gave me great feedback, and we talked about a lot of the science, and he really helped me out, kind of like putting actual things like the universe square law, which is that explain kind of how this all works, and so I ended up trying to really make it as grounded as possible, so it wasn't too fantastical. And yeah, so it was an absolute ton of research. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it shows, but like it wasn't hard to follow. There wasn't like, I wasn't like caught up in all the technical aspects of it. So good on you for like translating all those ideas.
Yeah. I think of it as a thriller with the sci-fi backdrop.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where I wanted the science to be, if you really wanted to dig into it, you could. If you wanted to know, like if you wanted to research some of the stuff that I talk about in the book, you actually can research it, and it does really exist, and you actually can learn about how it would work. But if you just don't care and you just want to know what happens to Beth, that's okay too.
Yeah, for sure. So this is, I'll ask you one scientific question and then I'll move on from it. But after doing all that research, do you feel like time travel is possible?
I think it's plausible. I mean, the biggest thing, I mean, for example, you can't send matter through a wormhole. So that was one of the things that I had to, like, you mentioned Michio Kaku, and I've told this anecdote a few times, but so Michio Kaku is a wonderful physicist, and he was doing like and I come up with this idea, and I was writing it as a screenplay originally, and Michio Kaku was doing like an online Q&A, and I asked, if you sent pure data through a wormhole, would it be stable, and would it work? And because if you send like even a particle of matter or mass, it collapses.
Right.
And they read him the question on air, and he was like, yes, it would work. And I was like, sweet.
There you go.
Good. Yeah. So that was great. The whole thing about it, bending space-time to go back to a point of your own life, is kind of like the most realistic scenario of all the time travel scenarios, because you're in your own timeline, so you're kind of bending time to go back to yourself is more theoretically possible, we'll say, than going to visit the dinosaurs or whatever.
Right.
And the 90 seconds thing is because one of the other things is they harness negative energy to power the machine, and we can't harness negative energy, but we're trying to. And if we can, it'll be like an amazing power source. So they use negative energy, but there's only so much negative energy that you can use before you would need like a nuclear power plant or something. So that was kind of part of the 90 seconds was how long can you keep this wormhole stable for? And so that was part of why I kept it to like that time. Yeah. So it is sort of, it's as theoretically possible as I could make it. Whereas if you really, and Kip Thorne's machine, I researched his time machine concepts, and that was part of how I built the physical machine that's in the book. So it's as theoretically possible as I think any time machine that's ever been written. in my humble opinion. It's very grounded. It's not fantastical. So it could happen. We just need to, like, we don't have quantum computers yet, but we're going to have quantum computers very soon. We don't have, all that stuff that we don't have now, we're going to have in 5-10 years. It's going to change a lot of things.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That actually dovetails a little bit with what another question I had about, there's sort of this undercurrent, this theme of corporate greed in the book. So Beth is building her machine under the umbrella of Langan Corp, which, by the way, named after Sarah or John by any chance?
We'll say both.
Okay, yeah, sure. Sarah and John Langan are both horror authors. So much of the plot revolves around her trying to juggle the concerns of the director of the program, his fiduciary obligations to the board, etc. It seems to be like the implication is that scientific progress is kind of hindered by a corporate mindset. Would you agree with that, or how did that angle sort of come about while you read
no,
it?
it's not hindered because he's paying for it, and I think that's the thing, and it's and that's the thing that becomes complicated because in order for Beth and Coulson to develop their technology, they had to basically have a sponsor, and so Langan Corp became that sponsor. But by giving them the money they needed to make the technology, they sort of had this control over the technology. Mm-hmm. So there's this part of the book is there's this sort of tug of war between Beth, her independence with the machine, and being able to do what she wants to do with it and do it at a certain pace, and then Langan Corp basically pushing her, and saying, no, we need it now because money's running out, and we need answers, and we need the machine to do stuff, and so that is part of the tension of the book, is her being kind of constantly struggling with the pressure of this corporate giant looming over her and saying faster, faster, faster.
Yeah.
While she's just, and to the point where she ends up putting herself in very dangerous situations.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because it's like she's sort of like a mad scientist archetype. But it's interesting to have that kind of archetype with like a corporate structure over it. I just thought that was really interesting. Speaking of structure, I wanted to talk about the structure of the book a little bit. So most of it's in third person, but when Beth is traveling, you switch to first person. There's also some emails, like transcripts. Some pages only have one word on them. So I'm just curious how you thought about structuring the novel. Was that just sort of all instinctual, or did you have a thought about how time travel affected the structure of the novel itself?
Oh, no, it was more just what's the best way to tell this story. Sure. And I think when I wanted, and actually what Orbit did, which I thought was pretty bold, they removed like page numbers and headers from those pages where Beth is traveling.
Oh.
And so it's almost like you're traveling with Beth.
Yeah.
And that was always the intention, was, okay, I'm telling you a story. Now we're all going to go on this little trip together. And so I think it puts the reader way more into the moment, into what's happening with Beth. Just like the airplane scene I just read, you kind of get that vibe. You feel a little bit more in that cockpit. You feel, because you're watching everything through her eyes and it's all first person. So I really wanted the reader to have the experience of traveling. Mm-hmm. And so that was why I did that. And as far as the stuff with, as far as like the formatting of the text and having one sentence pages or one word pages, that's just cheating. That's dramatic effect.
Yeah.
Just like, and also like what Colin's referring to is those pages where they're counting down before she travels, and it's sort of like 3, 2, and then you turn the page and it's got like a 1. And then you turn the page, and then it's getting you in there. Like we're all traveling, you're all going through the wormhole together. So that was all but it was instinctual, but that it was part of the storytelling.
Yeah, for sure. It felt very cinematic. Like the fact that you said it started as a screenplay, that makes a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of like really interesting visual stuff. It's not like hard to follow physically in the space. So
blocking. One thing I learned about screenwriting, because I was writing screenplays and then I started writing genre novels, is when you write screenplays, you learn a lot about dialogue and you learn about visuals, but you also learn a lot about blocking and how to block a scene.
Yeah.
and you know where everybody is and what they're doing and how they're getting from here to here. And sometimes when you read a book, the blocking is wrong.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, wait a minute, how did that person get over
Yeah.
to that other side of the room? That's part of one of the things from my screenwriting that carries over. But when I was writing it as a screenplay, and actually when I wrote it as a book, it was called Observe. And then the publisher, Orbit, wanted to change the title. And I was like, no, you're not changing the title. It's called Observe. It's the only thing it can be called. It's the best title in the world. It can't be anything else. So we're just going to leave it alone. And they're like, well, let us just come up with some ideas and we'll get in. Like, I'm telling you, it's called Observe. And then I was in the UK doing a tour thing, and my UK editor was there. And I pulled her aside and said, hey, Nadia, what's this changing the title stuff? What's going on? She goes, yeah, we have some ideas. I'm like, well, come on, just tell me, what is it? She's like, well, one idea that we really like is calling it the third rule of time travel. And I was like, oh, that's way better.
It's
So
a
much
really
better
good title. Did you have any other time travel stories you were thinking about while you were working on this manuscript?
No, I think for me, this story was so much about the scientist caught between protecting her invention, struggling with grief, struggling with raising a daughter, and fighting this kind of corporate giant. Like, her character was so big to me that, and there was so much going on with her that for me was always really like where my mind was. I didn't really think so much about I mean, it sounds stupid, but I didn't really think so much about the time travel part of it. I was really focused on her story, and the time travel was sort of like a device to tell her story.
It's funny you say that, because the second half of that Stephen King quote I mentioned earlier was, the key is to focus on the characters and their journey, not the mechanics of time travel, which it sounds like you did. But by the time I was done with the book, I was like beside myself. I was just like barreling through the last 50 pages because I was really, really invested in Beth. She's really a tragic character, really fascinating. You want to talk a little bit more about how you crafted her and her journey throughout the book? Yeah,
like I just said, I had the idea. The idea was that she and her husband basically created this technology together, and then they sold it to this company, and they were like sort of the two project leads, and they had a staff, and things were clicking, and blah blah blah. And then her husband tragically dies, which is not a spoiler. It's in the, like, from the get-go, her husband dies, and so. I don't know. I think for Beth, I was just kind of like, I wanted to tell her story about fighting the man, as it were. And I think I was talking to somebody about, they were talking about adapting it for a film, and they were talking about her character, and they had an actress in mind, and we were both just saying the same thing, which is like, look, whoever it is, they have to be able to do they have to be like a Spitfire, and they've got to be tough, and they've got to be super smart. But they also have to have like significant emotional depth, because she goes through the ringer in this book. And also it's one of those things where the contrast between how she is at work at this lab, where she's under so much pressure, and she's dealing with things that are impossible technology wise, science wise, and straining every fiber of her brain to make work, and then like going home and giving her daughter a bath. And so that was that contrast was really interesting to me. So that was just, so she arrived pretty fully formed, and I think if anything, based on early critical reviews, I probably focused on her too much and not enough on some of the other characters, because I think some of my other characters maybe came off as a little 2D because I was just so involved with her. But she's kind of a cool character, and I'm excited for people to meet her.
Yeah, I disagree, by the way, about the other characters.
Thank you, it's very kind.
I like Tariq a lot, and Langan, I forget his first name, but the Jim, yeah, he was great too. Really interesting character. So again, I don't want to give too much away.
People were like, he's kind of this like caricature, or whatever, because he's so horrible. I'm like, no, there are legit horrible. That's how people. I've known these people, and they're like legit horrible people. And so it's like, I sometimes when you read and I'm not banging on reviewers or anything, but sometimes I think people are like, a woman would never do that, or a man in that situation would never do that, or a person in that situation would never do that. I'm like, no, you would never do that.
Yeah.
But like, you are not like. There's a lot of people on the planet, and everyone's very different. And I think just because you can't necessarily relate to it or connect to it, I think to broadly think like, oh, that wouldn't be the way it would work, because I would never do that. I think people have to be a little more open-minded about that. There are like some pretty severe folks out there.
For sure.
I mean, I think we're getting a big dose of it right now.
Yes, definitely. I mean, he didn't seem over the top to me at all. I was like, yeah, that's probably what would happen.
People would never
Yeah.
believe if I wrote a character like Donald Trump, people would never believe
I know,
in a million. If I wrote Trump and Musk,
I know.
no one would ever believe in a million. They'd be like, this is the most
It's so cartoonish.
crap I've ever read.
No,
yeah.
Jim Langan is much more grounded compared to those two. So the structure of this book, as it pertains to the science, I found it really interesting, really satisfying, because kind of the deeper you get into the book, the more you realize you actually don't really understand the science, or the characters understand it less and less. And it culminates in this, I want to be careful about how I word it. It's a great ending. Like, I loved the ending. And it went somewhere that I was like not expecting it to go at all. So I'm curious, did you have to like reverse engineer it, like work backwards from that? Or did you just kind of find your way naturally to that conclusion?
When I come up with an idea and I start thinking about it, usually one or two scenes pop up into my head.
Mm-hmm.
And those become sort of like these building block scenes. Because I know, like, oh, that's a moment. I love that moment. Now how do I get there? And I love this moment. How do I get there? And the ending was one of those moments. And there's another moment in the book, which I won't spoil, that was that same moment. I just had to get there. And that ends up kind of constructing a lot of the story, because you want to get to these stepping stones. So I did know the ending before. I always know the ending of a book or a short story or whatever before I write anything. I have to. I can't work the other way. I can't work the other way around. Although sometimes it changes, like with Retirement Home Massacre, for example, the ending changed as I was writing it. So that happens too. But I have to at least know where I'm going. So with this book, I knew how it was going to end. And I think what surprised me a little bit during the writing process was that it got a little more supernatural than I'd intended.
Mm-hmm.
And I always had the rules being somewhat broken, but I think the more I got into it, I kind of I started noticing themes that were coming up into the story. And one of the themes was the idea of the universe pushing back against the technology, and the universe kind of becoming a character. And I like stuff like that. I wrote a story called Mandala, and like the ocean is kind of a character in that story, like a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And I sort of like the idea of the universe being this like force to be reckoned with, and like the universe was not happy. So that became a big theme for me. And so that, and the idea that no matter how smart we are so ignorant of what the universe is, how it works, what the rules are.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can create these 3 rules that we think are so like, okay, here we go, we got it. And then like the fact that we don't even know, I use the analogy of the iceberg underwater, where you see the tip of the iceberg above water, and then you look down, you see this whole mountain beneath.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like that's how the universe is. We're like, every time we think we have it figured out, we're really just seeing that little bit of it. So that was another theme for me with the book. And so as it progressed, that became part of the story.
Yeah, I really like that too. I could like feel the universe as a character more and more as the book progressed. And it was really satisfying. So this is your first like hard sci-fi novel. There are elements though of like horror throughout. There's some literary stuff. There's maybe some satirical stuff too. Do you think much about genre as you're writing, or is it just like not really your concern?
No, not really. I mean, like I said, I'm primarily a horror writer, so I have like contracts to fulfill. So in that sense, it has to be a horror story or whatever. But I mean, to be honest with you guys, it's kind of changed for me. I would say a hard no to this question 3 years ago, when I didn't have a book deal, and I didn't have, it was hard to get published, and nobody, and I was just kind of like trying to get to that part, and now I've had a couple of book deals, and you do think about it a little bit more than I had, and not that it's going to change how I write or the kind of stories I write, but you have to think about, well, if I want to get a deal with this publisher, then I have to write this kind of story. Right. If I want to get a deal with this publisher, then I have to write this kind of story. And there's some publishers who are saying, we just want your sci-fi, we don't want your horror, or we just want something that's more mainstream or something that's not so whatever. And so you do nowadays. I find myself thinking about what story fits that mold, not necessarily changing the story I've written or thought about, but I do find myself picking a little bit more. I'm writing this for this. I'm writing this story for this publisher or this outlet. So it does come up more now than it has in the past. But I have stories that are sci-fi. I have stories that are horror. I have stories that are non-genre, all of which I kind of like and get excited about. And that's one of the things that I consistently and continuously talk about with my agent is like, what do we want to do next?
Yeah.
And what's the best project to focus on? Because you can only really write 1 or 2 books a year if you're cranking, and you still want to be selective about what you write about, what you use that time for. So it does come up. When I wrote Time Travel, for example, I wasn't thinking about it. I was just writing a story, and I was assuming that I was going to sell as horror. I actually pitched it first to a horror publisher. So it does have some scary stuff in it.
Definitely.
So I wasn't really thinking about it as science fiction, but then we sold it to Orbit, who were like, we're going to market it as sci-fi. And I was like, okay. And, whatever. So the check clears. But I didn't change anything.
Yeah.
It's the same story.
Yeah. I feel like it's like comfortable as a thriller, sci-fi, horror.
Yeah. It could be a thriller. Right. It could be a lot. And so I think I leave that up to, for the most part, up to the publishers. But if they ask me for something, or if I have a contractual obligation to write something for somebody, then I obviously am thinking more like, well, this is more up their alley than this idea would be. But other than that,
we're just about out of time. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about it? Because I am very excited to read.
So it's coming out in September 30th, right before Halloween, a little bit before Halloween there. And it's called Springs Retirement Home Massacre, and it's about a serial killer in a retirement home. And it's interesting because the book, I pitched the book as kind of a dark comedy. And I was like, it's going to be super violent. Like I was sitting across from my editor at a table at a bar. And I was like, in New York City. And I was like, it's going to be super violent, but it's going to be darkly funny. And it's going to be these great characters. But I think it's going to be like, it'd be like a really fun, wild kind of serial killer slasher. And she was like, great. Yeah, write it. And then like I had all this kind of like personal tragedy in my life from like, when I pitched it to like when I actually wrote it, like both my parents died and I had to go through all this stuff with my dad and dementia and blah, blah, blah. And so all this like life stuff happened. And so the book kind of became really different. And I was like, yes, it's still a slasher. It's still violent. It's not as funny. But I really got into exploring themes of like aging and family and what does it mean, to get to a certain point of your life where you have to make these hard decisions about what you do to your family and who's going to take care of you and what does my life look like now and how much independence do I have and how much independence do I want to have? Yeah. And so a lot of questions that come up, I think, when people age and get older and there's a character who has dementia who I kind of based on my dad loosely. And so it kind of became a much more character-rich story that deals with pretty heavy themes. But it's also like a slasher. So it's an unusual book. And I'm actually doing the final proof edits on it right now. I was doing it right before I came here. So but that's what the book's about. And I'm really hoping that people dig it. I mean, I think it's going to be, I don't think all that baggage will come across when you read it. I think it'll read much more like a fun horror thriller slasher, but it's definitely in the background of it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm so excited for that.
Yeah, thank you. Also, Tor Nightfire, who did my novel Boys in the Valley.
Yeah.
Same publisher again.
Yeah, great publisher. They do some great stuff. All right, well, Philip, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
And buy Third Rule of Time Travel. It's excellent. We have a bunch of other Philip's books in the horror section. Buy those too. And yeah, good night, everyone.
If you'd like more information from us, check out the show notes or send us an email at podcast@villagewell.com. You can always order the books mentioned through our website. This episode of the Village Well podcast is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you next week, and keep reading.